So we came up, all the tonnage and all the vehicles, all the weaponry, everything you see is privately owned by individuals, and that's all brought up to the event by trailer, by trucks, by cars, however guys can get up here. I myself, I come from Iowa. The group of guys that I'm with, some of them are out of Minnesota, Wisconsin. There's groups up here from Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, I mean all over. So we all come together, put up our wares, and it just kind of develops into an encampment, as you can see. And over the years this is growing. Again, we're 105th Combat Engineers. We're part of the 30th Infantry Division. We were known as the Old Hickory. That's our infantry patch, and we were basically National Guardsmen out of North Carolina is how we were formed. We were part of D-Day. We were D-Day +4 on the beach landing, so we didn't actually come in on D-Day, but 4 days later is when the 105th Combat Engineers were put ashore. And then from that time forward, we fought our way through France, Belgium. We were part of the Battle of Mortain, and we were part of the Battle of the Bulge. So we had some very pivotal battles with the German Wehrmacht through the stage of the war. So we were known by the German infantry as Roosevelt's SS. We were known to be very tenacious fighters, and we stood our ground. So that's how we got to be nicknamed that by the German Wehrmacht. Just some of our equipment that we brought up. Of course, we brought our standard M1 Garands, which was issued to every foot soldier. That's the basic weaponry issue. We do have some more weaponry in here. We have the M1 Carbine. The M1A1 Thompson, which was an automatic weapon. As long as you depress the trigger, you could keep the rounds coming out, or you could singly fire them up until your rounds ran out. And that's a round of 15, but they did have magazines of 30. Of course, then we have the BAR, which is the Browning automatic rifle. This weighs 20 pounds in itself, so it's a heavy piece of equipment. Of course, the engineers, we were responsible, not mainly, our main job really wasn't infantry. We were responsible for building roads, constructing things, laying mines, but we were also in charge of blowing things up. So we would blow bridges up, we would tear up roads, we would hinder the enemy, but we would keep our troops moving forward. And then if we weren't doing engineer type of duties, we would be regular infantry. So we were trained to that capacity also. So we would have had mines, we would have had TNT, dynamite, anything that would have went boom, we would have been involved with. So of course we have some over here, some of the food items that we would have carried with us. We had to be, or every soldier had to be self-sufficient. So you were very, very lucky if you got a hot meal in the field. Most of it was out of the boxes, and an interesting component of that was on the very back table. It's kind of in the back, but those are cans. And soldiers were issued 6 of those, 3 for breakfast, 3 for dinner, 3 for supper. But those weighed a lot and they made a lot of noise. So over the course of the war, they progressed, and then they progressed into the boxes. And of course that was your your breakfast, your dinner, your supper. You might have had a meat product in there. There would have been like crackers or biscuits. There would have been condiments in there, some like sugar, salt, and pepper. There always was like a pack of charms or juicy fruit or spearmint or some type of a candy that was in there. Of course, the formidable pack of cigarettes was always put in there. There was always a can opener in there. And then the most important piece out of there was always the toilet paper. So over here is just some of our other equipment. We would have had picks, shovels, axes, wire cutters, anything to do with laying mines or detonating stuff. So, and this is just a small amount of what we normally set up. On D-Day, the United States didn't know if Germany was going to use chemical weapons like they did in World War I. We had no idea. So when the troops hit the beaches, they had to have their gas masks, and we carried those usually across our chest. Sometimes they were on our hips, but very early in the war, the troops and the soldiers figured out that they didn't really use those. So anything that the soldier didn't use on a daily basis, they discarded and got rid of. So they would have taken out the gas mask in the bag, but they would have kept that bag to put other equipment in and carry it. But every soldier going in on the beaches on D-Day had the gas mask. So.
Well, welcome to this Victory Workers boarding house. This is a one-room boarding house for a war worker who works for a company that was originally located in Youngstown. It's a static corporation. They made microphones in Youngstown, such as the Conneaut, as you see here. Well, in 1944, a static moved to Conneaut, where they made naval sonar. And this character, this war worker, packed up her house in Youngstown after her son left for the Navy and 2 daughters married. She's a widow. And she decided that for the duration she would rent this little place and work at a static. Here are all of her creature comforts that she needs. She has her radio, her books, magazines. She's surrounded by photographs of her loved one. She works 12-hour days. She has a little sleeping area. And when she's not working at a static, she sells war bonds. She's passionate about that because every dollar that someone invests in our nation means that her son in the Navy is reaping the benefits of that, maybe a new aircraft carrier. Over the duration of 4 years, 85 million Americans bought war bonds that totaled $180 billion. That's a couple of $1 trillion, I think, today. But so she is passionate about that. Everything in here makes her feel like her home away from home until the war ends. The war front was the linchpin to bringing these boys home. Every sacrifice that was made with Johnny in mind, whether he be in the Aleutian Islands or on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific, or maybe he was in Italy. So the ration was very key to that, making sure that people all across the nation had the exact same share of what was available, whether it be processed foods in cans, coffee, gas, and sometimes even if it wasn't on the ration, it didn't mean that it was actually available. You can go to the butcher thinking you're going to get a nice sirloin steak, but end up coming home with liver or kidney. But that's okay, because maybe Johnny was getting that sirloin steak back in Italy. Coffee was rationed for not a very long time, because I think that was stretching it. Americans love their coffee. So from November of 42 to July of 43, coffee was rationed just a pound for every 6 weeks. And that was a stretch. Other things that affected the wartime was specifically when Pearl Harbor happened. Americans really didn't like those sneaky Japs at the time, as they said. And many Japanese china sets ended up smashed in the streets along with toys. This is one little set here that I have on display as a sign of I survived the war. Inside a wartime home front, you'll see something like a blackout shade. Our air raid wardens were diligent in letting us know when a practice drill would happen, and the alarm would sound in a community. Everyone would come inside, lights out, shades down, because we were always diligent of looking in the sky, because you never know. I mean, U-boats had come ashore on Long Island, so if that's possible, who knows what could happen over our skies, right? The air raid warden would walk up the street, look for a sliver of light, and sure enough, if there was something, he'd let you know, turn that light off, get that radio off, pull those shades down. So, of course, the Statue of Liberty was dimmed. The Great White Way of Times Square was dimmed down, so just the bottom was lit. But Miami was slow on it because they didn't really want to change tourism all that much. Other things that you'll find in a wartime home will be a service star. This didn't really carry over too much into the Korean War, but you'll see here the part that's shining out to all passersby is this blue service star. Now, the character that lives here has a son in the Navy, so she has one blue star here. He's serving. If she had 3 children serving, she'd have 3 blue stars. And if one was killed in action, she'd cut out a piece of fabric in gold and sew it on an inch from the edge, an eighth of an inch from the edge, and now she's a gold star mother. Today we hear the term Gold Star family, and these are the families that deserve the highest respect from our nation because they have sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice, their loved one, for our freedoms. In other communities, like Conneaut, all across America, there was an honor roll. This honor roll represents the Gold Star boys who didn't return home from Conneaut. There are 42 in total. They served in all branches of the armed forces, including the auxiliaries. By auxiliaries, I mean merchant marines, civil air patrol, and even one of the fellas was from the Army Railroad Battalion, which you never hear much about them. They were able to get everything to where it needed to be. 42 boys who had sweethearts, wives, children, boys as young as 18 years old. 3 sets of brothers didn't make it home. 2 were brother-in-laws on that panel. A woman lost her husband and her brother. One of the fellas on that panel, his remains were discovered in 2018, and he was returned home just last month and buried with military honor. So while the structure of the honor rolls varied from town to town, this honor roll measures 5 feet tall by 7 feet wide, and it is here that we remember all of those boys in Conneaut who didn't return home.
We are portraying the Panzer Regiment of the LAH, and we came up with several examples of the medium-sized Panzer tanks which the German army used at the time. We have Panzer IIIs and a Stug Panzer as well. These tanks can engage and destroy the American tanks at almost twice the range. So they're very devastating. Any one of these is more than a match for any of the American vehicles. Our group is located in Knoxville, Tennessee. We have a total of 6 Panzers, as well as other soft vehicles like trucks and artillery pieces like the 88 millimeter flat gun. We only attend a couple of the larger or more important events each year.
Happening here to cause the Germans to withdraw, supported by their heavy artillery. The Allied armor, British armor, is able to make a flanking attack. Now, tanks are very strong in frontal attacks, but their side armor is usually generally weak. Once you turn that flank, you become very vulnerable. You can also see that the Canadians have made some headway across the beach. It takes sheer determination and bravery.
Good afternoon. My name is John Ryan. I'm from Champaign, Illinois. My impression, when reenactors speak of the way they look or what they are wearing, they speak of their impression. My impression is that of a French gendarme or policeman in 1944. The French police have a mixed history. During the early days of the war, the early days of French occupation after 1940, the French police pretty much collaborated with the Germans, and they did some fairly unsavory things, rounding people up and so forth.
Major Strasser has been shot. Round up the usual suspects.
When it became pretty apparent that the Germans might not win the war, especially after the Battle of Stalingrad in mid-war, the French police began to understand that they had better do something to clear their name and establish a better reputation. By August of 1944, the Germans were no longer trusting the French police. French police had been warning people about raids, they had been undermining German activity. So the Germans in Paris decided that they would disarm the French police force. Well, the French police force thought otherwise, so they took cover in their main police station and they started firing on the Germans. And then the whole city of Paris rose and expelled the Germans, or captured them, and shortly thereafter the Allies arrived in Paris. So the French police, who had, as I said, done some unsavory things, ended up being heroes because they were the first to rise. And many police thereafter joined the resistance, the people who were against the Germans, and proceeded for the rest of the war to resist German influence.
You're welcome to the Production Corps sewing booth. The girls during World War II, the Production Corps volunteers of the American Red Cross, would go to a local camp and set up their sewing machines and their equipment and sew for the soldiers, doing minor repairs. Today we're sewing on patches and fixing some minor repairs that they need on pants, rip seams, that kind of thing. The Red Cross during World War II, the Production Corps started during World War I, continued on through World War II. They were responsible for sewing, knitting, and most importantly, bandage folding. During World War II, the Red Cross produced 3.5 billion bandages for the government. What you're seeing pretty much is living history because we are doing what the girls did in those days. So the girls during World War II originally had a gray board that they had a pattern on that they folded to. Mm-hmm. A gentleman from Delaware was sent by his wife one day to do some bandage folding. He was an engineer and said there had to be a better, faster way. So he came up with this, and this is how it works. Now the girls would be trained and you would be using gauze, but for demonstration purposes I'd use cotton.
Right.
And this is the way it goes. Properly trained, it would make bandage folding much, much faster.
Okay.
His chapter liked this idea so much, they sent the idea to the national chapters, to the National Red Cross, and they liked it enough to publish it in Popular Science magazine, where we found the plans for this.
Wow. So how fast would that do that compared to the old way? Do you have any idea?
It's something like 2/3 faster.
Wow. So let's send an engineer.
Yep.
I do German. My family's German. Came over from Germany in the early 1900s. I've always had a fascination with military history. My father served in the American military for many years, and he was airborne. We do our German paratrooper, and I just kind of wanted to do something different. So I started researching German paratroopers, and that's what we do. We do Regiment 6. I've been doing reenacting for about 3 years. This isn't the only impression that I do. I do in multiple countries, but definitely my favorite impression. I definitely like the German paratroopers. It's a fun event. There's a lot of good reenactors that come out here, a lot of cool gear, a lot of good guys, a lot of good friends, and it's a great time, and I'd recommend it. We do German paratroopers, so normally, our normal gear is our jump smock here. We have a lot of, standard equipment, canteens for water, ammo bandoliers. Mine's a little different. I'm set up for a non-commissioned officer, so I have an MP40 pouch instead of rifles. Submachine guns were normally issued to squad leaders, people of importance, stuff like that. Usually, when you're in camp, they always try to get a hot meal, and this was a pretty quick and efficient way to get goulash or a simple soup or meal out to the troops as quickly as possible. For the most part, obviously, when supplies were plentiful, they had plenty of food and water, stuff like that. Obviously, as the Allies blockaded Germany, it made getting supplies harder and harder and harder. So they always, most of the civilian population didn't eat very well, but the German military, they still tried to funnel as much food and supplies to the troops as they could.
Hi, I'm Sarah Junta, and this display is for the U.S. Cadet Nurse Corps, which was active from 1943 to 1948 in the United States. So the U.S. Public Health Service actually started this program to address the nursing shortage as other nurses were going off to war overseas. And so the nurses that came into this program started as early as age 17 and went up to age 35. And their education, textbooks, room and board was all paid for. And they also had a little stipend. And so at that time period, they actually did about 80% of the nursing in the United States on the home front. So in all of our U.S. hospitals and medical facilities. And so on this board over here, we have some of the recruiting posters that were used at the time. And my board that fell over in the wind. Over here we have a recruiting pamphlet, some of the original nurse patches, a final exam actually from that time period, and then some more information, advertisement in a magazine. And my uniforms here, these are two of our dress uniforms. This is a winter uniform, and this is a summer uniform. It was a 30-month accelerated program that had a 6-month clinical at the end of that. About 124,000 completed the program in that 5-year time period, and about 180,000 entered.